Hi everyone, welcome back to the Rugby League History channel. Tonight I'll be talking about the 2021 NRL Grand Final. It's fast approaching us, and for pretty much the entire year there's been a lot of media talk and fan talk, especially from Melbourne fans. I can recall as early as round 4 that he says, look, we're the only team that's going to meet the grand final along with Penrith. Nobody else stands a chance. It's just going to be the both of us in the final. But tonight I'm going to go back in history and I'm going to talk about some years where the two top teams, or the teams that were expected to meet the grand final, didn't meet the grand final. So for this list tonight, I'm only going to be going from the NRL era, nothing before that. I could have used plenty of examples before 1998, but let's just stick with the NRL era. The first example I'm going to use is the 1999 NRL season. So for that year, Cronulla and Parramatta were the two best teams all year. Cronulla finished in first. I still think it's the best year that they had in their history when they come first that year. Parramatta come second. And the two teams that actually come third and sixth made the grand final that year, which were Melbourne and St George. Going into week one of the finals, Parramatta and Cronulla were still expected to meet the grand final at that stage. Cronulla beat defending premiers Brisbane 42 points at 20 in week one of the finals, and that was back in the days when Brisbane rarely ever got beaten by that scoreline by anyone at any stage, and Parramatta easily accounted for Newcastle in the qualifying final. But going into the preliminary finals, Cronulla were upset in that preliminary final against St George 24 points to 8 after leading 8-0 at half time, and Parramatta lost 18 points to 16 against Melbourne despite leading 16 points to 0 at half time. It's also worthy to note that in this final series, St George beat Melbourne comfortably in week one of the finals 34 points to 10. So in this instance you can see that Cronulla and Parramatta were the two best teams all year. And at the end of the day, it ended up being Melbourne in third and St George in sixth, which ended up making the grand final. We now move on to the 2005 NRL season. That year, Parramatta come in first as minor premiers, St George in second. They were the two best teams all year. Both these sides were expected to meet the grand final, but at the end of the day, it was West Tigers in fourth and North Queensland in fifth who made the grand final that year. And in the preliminary finals, both Parramatta and St George made it, but Parramatta lost 29-0 to North Queensland at Stadium Australia. Meanwhile, St George were upset by West Tigers at the Sydney Football Stadium. It's also worthy to note that Parramatta had beaten North Queensland 50 points to 12 earlier in the year, and in the first week of the finals, North Queensland had lost 50 points to 6 against West Tigers. Parramatta had also beaten West Tigers twice that year, and having seen West Tigers win the night before, the Parramatta players were very confident of going into that grand final, but they fell at the preliminary final stage, and we saw the 4th and 5th place teams in the decider. The following year in 2006, now I think this is the big one on the list, personally myself. It saw Melbourne finish top of the table that year on 44 points. Canterbury finished second on 36 points, and Brisbane finished a distant third on 32 points. Melbourne only lost one game from round 12 to the actual grand final itself. I remember at the time, halfway through the year, the Daily Telegraph published a story saying, can we just stop and have the grand final now? Melbourne and Canterbury are clearly the two best sides in the competition. Nobody's going to come close. In the final series, Melbourne easily made the grand final. Meanwhile, Brisbane in third place, they lost their opening finals week one match against St George 20 points to 4. They then recovered in the preliminary final despite being down half-time 20 points to 6 against Canterbury. They won that match 37 points to 20 to reach the 2006 NRL Grand Final. They were the massive underdogs in this game, and they come out on top to defeat Melbourne 15 points to 8 at Stadium Australia. And I think it's personally one of the biggest grand final upsets, and everyone predicted Melbourne and Canterbury. It ended up being Melbourne-Brisbane. In 2009, I'm pretty sure everyone just remembers the Hayne playing and Jared Hayne's amazing season that year, but not many people would remember that St George finished on top of the table on 38 points. Canterbury finished second on 38 points. Both sides were the two best teams all year. But the teams that ended up making the grand final were Melbourne in 4th place and Parramatta in 8th place. Of course, we know that Parramatta had to win 3 sudden death matches pretty much to make the grand final. And along the way, they beat St George in week 1 of the finals. And then they beat Canterbury Bankstown in front of a record non-grand final crowd at Stadium Australia to reach the 2009 grand final. Meanwhile, Melbourne in 4th were expected to be quite competitive in the finals, but it was always St George and Canterbury that were tipped to meet the grand final. And both sides weren't there on grand final day. It saw Melbourne in 4th and Parramatta in 8th place. And now we come on to the 2011 season. I'm pretty sure some people that follow this channel would remember this quite fondly. Anyway, it saw Melbourne come first that year on 42 points. Manly were the second best team that year on 40 points, but Melbourne were a class above everyone in the regular season. They were the best team in that regular season. Along the way, they picked up 12 wins in a row, and they looked set to reach the grand final a year after the whole salary cap issue. New Zealand finished in 6th place that year on 32 points, so 10 points behind Melbourne. In week 1 of the finals, New Zealand lost 40 points to 10 against Brisbane, but then upset West Tigers in the second round of the finals, and then they faced off against Melbourne in the preliminary final. They were given no chance to win that match, and they ended up winning that match 20 points to 12 at Amy Park there in Melbourne to reach their second grand final. And this all come after pretty much the media and the fans all said it was going to be a Melbourne and Manly grand final, and that's not what we got. The 2019 season saw Melbourne once again finish as minor premiers on 42 competition points. The second best team that year, and the team that everyone predicted to meet the grand final alongside Melbourne, was Sydney Roosters. They finished on 36 points. And Canberra, who ended up reaching the grand final in Melbourne's place, finished in 4th on 32 points. Melbourne, like the 2011 season I just mentioned, had one of the most dominant seasons in NRL history. They only lost 2 matches between round 8 to round 25, and they were expected, along with Sydney Roosters, to face off in a grand final rematch, but we didn't get that. In week 1 of the finals, Canberra defeated Melbourne down there in Amy Park in a massive shock upset, courtesy of a late John Bateman try. They won 12 points to 10, and then the following week, Melbourne bounced back, defeating Parramatta 32 points to 0. And at the time, now that Canberra were on the other side of the draw, everyone was saying that it was going to be a Canberra-Melbourne grand final. Melbourne travelled to the City Cricket Ground to face off against East in the preliminary final, and they were comfortably beaten 14 points to 6 there at the City Cricket Ground. And for the start of the year, when everyone said it was going to be Melbourne and Sydney Roosters, it ended up being Sydney Roosters and Canberra. So that was just a brief overview of times in the past where there's been 2 clubs where the media and the fans have all expected them to meet the grand final and nobody else has a chance, and either one of them's not there or they're both not there. Now, that's not to say that Melbourne and Penrith won't be there in the 2021 NRL grand final, but I find it a bit disrespectful and incredibly arrogant, especially from Melbourne fans. I haven't really seen too many Penrith fans see it, but to see right from the start of the year or even from round 4 that you're going to be in the grand final and nobody else is going to be there but Penrith and nobody stands a chance, I find that a bit kind of naive and a bit silly, especially coming from Melbourne fans, when some of the examples that I've just proven here, just because you're the best team all year in the regular season doesn't mean that you have some sort of God-given right to meet the grand final and win the premiership. Once you get to the final series, it's a totally different kettle of fish and it's a totally different ball game. So there's some examples I brought you tonight. So that was my video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know in the comment section below. I hope you learned something tonight. I hope you learned about some past NRL seasons, and maybe if you're not a Penrith or Melbourne fan, this video might give you a bit of optimism and maybe a bit of hope going into the NRL final series. Anyways, this is Rugby League History signing off, and I'll catch you all later in the next one. Alright, tatty bye for now.